Hello again, and welcome to Adventures in Book Hunting. Although today will not be an Adventures and Book Hunting video, I found neither anything in quantity or quality that inspired me to try and do an Adventures in Book Hunting episode. So instead, I decided I would explore an idea that I've been kicking around for a while, and that is to do a video about the famous Appendix N. For those of you who aren't familiar with old school fantasy role playing games, Appendix N was a section of the original Dungeon Master's Guide in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game, published by Gary Gygax and TSR back in 1979. And in that list, Gary Gygax presents a list of inspirational reading, both for both the document for him in creating and composing the game, and hopefully for the benefit of players and game masters going forward. He makes a list of 29 authors, uh, and basically states that these authors were either of particular personal inspiration to him, or gave inspiration to certain facets of the game or the development of the game. Um, I have that list here with me, and I will put in a link so that if you'd like, you can go over this list yourself, at your pleasure and discretion. But I thought I'd kind of make this into a little quiz. Take it if you like, and if you'd like, comment on your results if you're so inclined. The way this little quiz that I'm going to give myself will work is that I will give myself a half point for any qualifying work by one of these 29 authors that I have read, and another half point if I own that work or another qualifying work on the list. And therefore, I can get for myself a total of 29 potential points. And I'm just curious to see how other folks will do, particularly folks who are younger than me, who and potentially people who are avid gamers now who've never experienced the older editions of the game, or just don't play that sort of role-playing game in particular. So anyway, I have the list here, and I'm going to try and go over it briefly. The first author on the list is Anderson Pohl, and he lists three works: Three Hearts and Three Lions, The High Crusade, and The Broken Sword. Now, for this, I will give myself a full point. I have read Three Hearts and Three Lions, I have read The High Crusade, and I own both of those works. I have never seen nor read The Broken Sword. But I can tell you this, I can certainly understand why this author's works were placed on this list, particularly the book Three Hearts and Three Lions. It is set in a very game-oriented setting, shall we say. And there are elements in the game that I can see direct connection to the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. There's inklings of an alignment system at work in this story. Paladin class is put front and center in this book, and the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons version of the troll, a particular monster, is encountered here. And in the book there is a very exciting and interesting scene where two characters confront a troll and have to figure out what its weaknesses are and how to defeat it. I'd recommend Holt Anderson in general. I've read lots and lots of his science fiction and his fantasy. He's probably more famous for his science fiction stories, and also historical fiction. A very broad author that fortunately we don't have with us anymore. But anyway, 1 point for Paul Anderson. The second author on the list is John Bellairs, who I'd never heard of then, and I still have never found any of that person's work or read any of it. So nothing for Mr. Bellairs. The next author on the list is Lee Brackett. Likewise, I had not, when I first read this list many years ago, encountered Lee Brackett and still have not. So once again, no points for Lee Brackett. And then the next author, Frederick Brown, 3 for 3. Had not read any Frederick Brown as a young person, still have not. And of course, don't own any. The next author I get a full point for, Edgar Rice Burroughs. And the works listed in Appendix N are the Halukidor series, probably mispronouncing, the Mars series, and the Venus series. And the Mars series are the stories of John Carter, a Confederate veteran displaced in time and space, finds himself on Mars and neck deep in adventure. I own two books in that series, Princess of Mars and The Chessmen of Mars, and I've read several of the books in that series. And I can certainly see the inspirational idea behind reading those for gaming. The next author is Lynn Carter, and the work cited is the World's End series. I have read Lynn Carter. Um, Lynn Carter has written a fairly large body of fantasy fiction, and I've read some of it. I know some of her Conan stories, but I have not read the World's End series, and so strictly following this quiz I've set for myself, I'm not going to give myself any points for uh, Lynn Carter. The next work is L. Sprague de Camp, and the works Lest Darkness Fall, The Valuable Friend, and others at all. I have read Lest Darkness Fall. I don't currently own anything by L. Sprague de Camp. I own a historical fiction work, but I don't think it counts, towards this quiz. So I'm only giving myself half a point for L. Sprague de Camp. Also, L. Sprague de Camp wrote a large body of Conan pastiche fiction, and he has, let's say, a controversial um, legacy as far as his promotion and sometimes editing of the original Conan stories. Don't want to get into it here, but in any event, I'm a little surprised that wasn't alluded to in the list. The next author on the list is L. Sprague de Camp again, along with Fletcher Pratt. Together they wrote and collaborated on many stories, including the Harold Shea series, which I have read but do not own. And I can certainly see where that series would be one that would be inspirational for gamers, both players and referees alike. The next writer on the list is August Derleth, which I always thought was somewhat of a curious selection for this list that Mr. Gygax wrote. August Derleth was a publisher and an editor, but as far as his work, his literary work, the stories he wrote, um, I wouldn't have put him in top tier. I do actually have a book, an anthology of fantasy fiction that August Derleth contributed to and edited, and so I give myself a full point. I just question why he's on the list at all. The next author on the list is Lord Dunsany. Um, Lord Dunsany is a fantasy writer that if you enjoyed Tolkien and you enjoyed everything that sprang from Tolkien, you should look into Lord Dunsany. Um, um, I have his seminal work, The Queen of Elfland's Daughter. Um, and if you read it now, you might think it's cliche, but it's cliche because he did it first. Lord Dunsany is good stuff, and I'd encourage anyone who can find it to read it. So, full point. The next author is Philip Jose Farmer for his World of Tears series et al. And I've certainly read all of the books in the World of Tears series. It was really fun stuff, and I can certainly see where it might give inspiration to players and game masters alike in the game. One full point for sure. The next author is Gardner Fox. I'm aware of the author, but I cannot honestly say I've ever read any of Mr. Fox's work, and I certainly don't own any. The next author on the list is Robert E. Howard, and what's listed is the Conan series. And you could also easily list the Cull series, the uh, and there's a couple others that I'm blanking on, but yes, his entire body of work, and I think is a direct inspiration for the Dungeons and Dragons game. Swords and sorcery, epic heroic fiction with a dark edge. I own collections of the Conan series, and as well as the King Kull series. So I give myself a full point for that. The next author is Sterling Lanier for Hero's Journey. Didn't know the author as a young person, have not ever encountered them since. So no points for that one. The next author on the list is one I really enjoyed and a personal favorite off of this list, and that is Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mauser series. They all have titles with swords against something or swords to something, and I read most all of them as I was when I was younger. In fact, followed the stories to its completion, right up until Mr. Leiber's death. Full point for that, and a hearty recommendation. If you like the feel of a traditional Dungeons and Dragons game, you should like reading that fiction. The next author on the list is H.P. Lovecraft. No particular work cited. Of course, I own the complete works of H.P. Lovecraft and have read much of it. If you like darker, more horrific elements in your gaming, it's a good place to go to. Certainly deserves to be on this list and to get a full point from me. The next author on our list is A. Merritt, and several works are cited: Creep, Shadow, Moonpool, Dwellers in the Mirage, et al. I know I've at least seen some of the author's work, but I can't honestly say that I've actually read any, and certainly don't own any. So can't give you any commentary on that one, and of course, no points. The next author on the list is Michael Moorcock, and the list includes Stormbringer, Stealer of Souls, which are a couple of the Elric novels, and the Hawk Moon series, especially, and in quotes, especially the first 3 books. Not read any of the Hawk Moon stuff, but I have read most of the Elric of Mellowbean books, including Stormbringer and Stealer of Souls. And yes, very good inspirational material for anyone's Dungeons and Dragons game. And also a work where you see the clash between law and chaos as ethical systems, kind of foreshadowing the Dungeons and Dragons alignment system. And next we have Andre Norton, with no work cited. And I can think of several Andre Norton works that potentially could be inspirational for your game. Of course, any work, any story can be inspirational to gaming. But she has some that I think, directly applicable, including her book, her short novel, Quad Keep, which is literally a Dungeons and Dragons story. Many people don't know this, but Andre Norton actually played Dungeons and Dragons with Gary Gygax, and that particular novel was inspired by those sessions. But I own a copy of Quad Keep, and of course have read it then, and so I get a full point for Andre Norton. The next author is Fletcher Pratt, again, for Blue Star, among others, which makes me conclude actually only 28 authors on the list. Gary, he snuck her in twice, or him twice. And I have not read any other works than when I talked earlier about reading the Harold Shea stories. So I think we'll just discount that. So modifying the quiz, I can only get 28 points. And of course, I'm not going to get close to that. Let's see. Oh, the next author. Oh, I skipped over one. Andrew J. Offutt. And the works are editor of the Swords Against Darkness series. I've never seen the Swords Against Darkness series, never read any of those works, don't own any of those works. I have read some Andrew Offutt. He's written many, many short stories, including for a series called Thieves' World, which was a fantasy anthology series from the 80s and into the 90s. Read many of those stories, but I'm not going to count it because this list specifically gives him on this list for that one role as an editor of a series of books that I've not seen. So 0 for Andrew Offutt. Next one coming on the list is Fred Saberhagen. Fred Saberhagen certainly deserves to be on this list. Written tons of science fiction and fantasy. He is on this list for Changeling Earth, among other stories. And I'm not sure about publication, and maybe that's why the works I'm most familiar with Saberhagen for are not on the list. Empire of the East and the Swords books, and I have read all the Empire of East books, read all the Swords books, and that is probably over 12 novels. And oh yes, very good stories, very applicable for anyone's Dungeons and Dragons game. So 1 point, and I own most of it now. 1 point for ownership, 1/2 point for ownership, 1/2 point for having read it, full point for Fred Saberhagen. As I said, good stuff. Highly recommend. The next author is Margaret St. Clair for the Shadow People and Sign of the Labrys. Don't know Miss St. Clair and don't own any of her stuff. So no points. The next author on the list is one that you've all been waiting for. If you haven't noticed already, these are going in alphabetical order. So we're up to T, and T is J.R.R. Tolkien. And of course, listed is The Hobbit and the Ring trilogy. More than valid inspiration for any Dungeons and Dragons game, and even beyond that, many of the other works of Tolkien would be really good works to delve into. Really, the world building aspects of running a game. Um, um, own many Tolkien volumes, and of course, have read it widely, so a full point. The next author on the list is Jack Vance. And the works cited are The Eyes of the Overworld and the Dying Earth series, among others. I have read most of the Dying Earth books, and yeah, certainly I can see their value as inspiration or getting ideas material for a Dungeons and Dragons game. Dying Earth is what many people call science fantasy. It's set in the far future of Earth, as our sun is dying and therefore our planet is dying. It's a milieu involving science, as Arthur C. Clarke would have said, so advanced that it appears like magic. But and it gives a direct contribution to the game. Jack Vance invented the magic system that was originally used in Dungeons and Dragons, Vancian magic. In the original Dungeons and Dragons game, wizards would memorize a spell, hold it in their heads, they would cast it, and then immediately forget that spell. They'd have to restudy it and rememorize it. That is the mechanism that Jack Vance uses in his Dying Earth series, and it was the way of magic in Dungeons and Dragons for decades. Certainly deserves to be on this list. And of course, the character of Vecna, that is still prominent in the Dungeons and Dragons game, is a rearranging of the letters in his name, Vance. The whispered one, Vecna, who was present in the first edition and every edition since, directly an homage to Jack Vance himself. So, but I don't actually own any of Jack Vance's stuff, so I'm only giving myself 1/2 point. The next author on the list is Stanley Weinbaum. Didn't read any as a young person, have not read it since, do not own any, so no points. Next after that is Manly Wade Wellman. I have never come across any of Wellman's work. Do not own any, so another 0. Not doing so well. The next author is Jack Williamson, and no particular works cited. I've read some science fiction from Jack Williamson, and since there are no works specifically attributed, I'm going to give myself 1/2 point for having read a good number of Jack Williamson's science fiction books, which I could see as being inspirational, at least tangentially, for a Dungeons and Dragons game. But do not currently own any, and I don't know that I ever have. So only 1/2 point for Mr. Williamson. And last, and certainly not least, um, a writer who I think has composed tons of material that would be good inspiration for your game either as a player or as a referee for that game, and not just Dungeons and Dragons, any role-playing game. Roger Zelazny for Jack of Shadows, the Amber series et al. And I have read Jack of Shadows. I have read and own all of the Amber books, and I have a special place for the et al. Part of the list. Roger Zelazny wrote a series of short stories and a sequel novel about a character, Dilvish the Damned, that I think any Dungeons and Dragons player should at least consider. Read it. Uh, Very interesting stories, very interesting world building, um, and just an interesting character study in Dilvish. It's also a buddy read or buddy story read. Um, uh, Dilvish has a companion who appears to the outside world with a large black horse, almost made of, uh, who appears to be made out of steel or iron, some sort of metal, but is actually a demon comrade of Dilvish. It's a very light spoiler, but I guess should have given a spoiler warning. But anyway, those stories are just great. But I would recommend Zelazny, not just for his fantasy works, but for anything he wrote. Zelazny, looking up, yeah, he probably still has more linear feet occupying my bookshelf than any other author, and you can't go wrong with Zelazny. You really can't. In any event, that's the list, and by my tabulation, I got 15 points. Apparently, out of a total of 28. Now that I reconsider, because old Gygax, he put one author on there twice, so 28 authors, 15 points. So I got a little more than half, not much more than half at all. Like I said, I think it's an interesting exercise to compose your own Appendix N, and Appendix N doesn't just have to be literary works or fictional works. If I were making a full-fledged Appendix N, everything that inspires me for running a game or playing in a game, there are many historical works, nonfiction works that can bring inspiration, television, movies, other games, video games. Sky's the limit. And in the future, I'll probably tackle some of those topics, including adding a few literary works, fictional works, to my own personal Appendix N. This video has gone on way longer than I wanted it to, so that will be for another day. But I appreciate your spending some time with me, and if you've made it here all the way to the end, yeah, please go through this list yourself. As I said before, I'll have a link in the description below. See how you did, and if you like, put the number. How many points would you get under my quiz criteria? 1/2 point for owning the author, and 1/2 point for having read it. I'm just curious to see if what other folks have managed to tackle, and if you want comments about what would be in your own personal Appendix N that isn't on this list. This list, of course, was, as I said, published in 1979, over 40 years ago, and there's been a lot written since then. Very entertaining, intriguing, and inspirational literature in the fantasy field that Appendix N certainly deserves an update. In any event, thank you again for your attention, and I wish you folks well until we see each other again. Thank you.